Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told out of voice of radio, so today we need to take a little bit of a look at some really good new Pokemon cards. We have seen the reveal of Paradigm Trigger over in Japan, and we've got a few interesting things here, including a new Pokemon V, but there are some really good cards here. Although, before we get into any of them, I just want to give a lot of love, not a little bit of love, I want to give a lot of love to this Okacheke Rockruff. There's no Hisuian in this set, unfortunately. That makes me a little bit sad. But when I keep telling you guys over and over again how much I love the artwork of Okacheke, look at this Rockruff. And that should kind of help to explain why. This card is a really good example of why I love Okacheke so gosh darned much. But let's start off with Hisuian Arcanine V, because this one looks really fun. So what we've got here is an ability, Guardian Gallop. Oh, and 230 HP actually. 230 HP is high for a Pokemon V, and I should, I suppose, make a point of saying the translations here are partly from the lovely Antoine Boulet, get well soon please, and the lovely me, because I did some of these myself. So the ability here is Guardian Gallop. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a fighting energy from one of your Pokemon to this Pokemon. And here's the thing. On the one hand, I love this. And on the other hand, how are we getting the fighting energy on? Because that's a big problem to me, right? If you can get the energy on around the field anywhere, this is lovely. But getting the energy just onto the field in the first place is a little bit of a problem. And that is the one that I'm a little bit worried about. Like, we've got Gutsy Pickaxe that will accelerate if the top card of your deck is a fighting energy. Obviously, we can use stuff like Arceus and Arceus V-Star in the early game and then kind of move them over to here when we're good and ready. You can use, like, Turbo Patch, I suppose, if you can flip aheads, which is far from a given. We don't have great ways to accelerate fighting energy as it stands at the moment. But there are some other ways around. I mean, Lucario from Brilliant Stars will absolutely work. That's the one, it's got a really interesting ability whereby you can put 2 damage counters on this Pokemon to search for a fighting energy and attach it to this Pokemon. But then you just move it over. Although that's an evolving stage 1, and like I've told you a few times recently, things along these lines do need to be very scared of the new Sableye that will just absolutely run through these evolving decks if it gets rolling, which it does pretty easily. So, yeah, this is a really nice ability if you can get the fighting energy onto the field, but one of the problems fighting decks have had for a while now is, how do we get the energy on? I mean, certainly one of the best options we've got here is Galarian Zapdos. Lets you bench it with 2 extra attached to it. And what you can potentially do here is bench Galarian Zapdos with the energy, move it over, scoop up net, do it all over again. And maybe that's the best answer here. Maybe that's the best way round. It's just something we need to bear in mind. But certainly if we ever get really good fighting energy acceleration, this is one to consider. And then the attack is like it always is for these kind of abilities. 4 colorless energy, 90 damage, plus 30 more for each fighting energy attached to this Pokemon. Obviously, things that are weak like Arceus and Hisuian Zoroark are going to fall down super easily here. But if you get enough fighting energy on, you'll get KOs on Pokemon V-Star. I mean, Pokemon V-Stars are generally 280, so you need to add 190. So if you've got 6 energy on here, you'll be doing 270. It's not quite enough. If you've got 5 energy on, then you'll be doing 240. It's not quite enough with a choice belt, so you'll need to add 1 extra energy in both of those situations. But the point is, if you can get the fighting energy on the field easily enough, this'll work. I'm giving it between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies. That would be barbaric. I'm not saying we don't have any fighting energy acceleration. I have given you a bunch of examples. I'm telling you I don't know if we got any that are good enough to really unlock this card in the way that I want to. But one card that is basically guaranteed to see a huge amount of play because it's amazing is Brandon. Although it's not great in the early game. You see, what Brandon does, it can only be played if it is the only card in your hand but you draw a card for each benched Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent's. Bearing in mind, Pokemon will not print a pure draw 4 card. Every time they print a draw 4, there's always something you have to do in order to qualify for the extra card. So there's always a catch when it's draw 4. This is potentially a draw 10, and in a lot of games this will be a draw 10. Mew decks are going to be filling up their bench. They kind of have to. Palkia decks are going to be filling up their bench. And look, all of these decks can save 1 or 2 spaces to try and hurt your draw a little bit, but they're hurting themselves as well. So sooner or later, they are just going to have to play their Pokemon. And I love this, ladies and gentlemen. I absolutely love this. It is, however, quite a situational card. It's not a million miles away from Colress here. Colress will shove your hand into your deck and draw a number of cards equal to both players' bench Pokemon. And the thing about Colress was there are times when Colress is kind of terrible, but most of the time it's at least fine. The thing is, this is Colress, but it's got to be the last card in your hand, which makes things way more awkward. And I am fully aware of that. So what I'll say is this. In a world where Luminion is a thing for getting it out, this is pretty good. In a world where Eldegoss is a thing for getting it out the discard, this is pretty gosh darn good. Although, do obviously remember that Eldegoss is seeing very little play right now. Eldegoss has well and truly fallen out of favour. We do need to bear that in mind. In a world where this can be very easily grabbed with something like Drizzile, or grabbed with the V-Star power of Arceus. You see where I'm going with this? We've got a bunch of ways right now to actually go ahead and grab this, and that's why I like it. I don't think it's going to be a 4-off stable in every deck, but playing it as at least a 1 or 2 in a whole bunch of decks that can search it out easily, yeah. Plus, look, if you filled your bench, it's a draw 5. Your opponent's not going to have 0 bench cards, so it's probably always going to be at least a draw 6. Most of the time it's going to be a draw 7 or draw 8, and it's going to go up to draw 10. So honestly, for me, the bigger question might be, can you empty your hand? Because if you can empty your hand, and a lot of decks can, this is awesome. And funnily enough, remember that Hisuian Arcanine does kind of ask you to empty out your hand, which I find very interesting. We're looking at all of that in this video. But do remember, and if you've played enough Hisuian Arcanine like I have, you will have seen this many times. Even with your very best efforts, even if you build a deck to empty out your hand, there will still be games where you cannot empty out your hand, or in the turns where you can't empty out your hand. So it's not a perfect card. It is not always going to work. But when it does, it is absolutely phenomenal. I'm giving this 4 Wassies, and honestly, I might be underrating it. This might be way better than a 4 Wassie card. Now, one card I also like very much indeed coming out of this set is the new Sigilif. It's not for the free energy, 70 damage, nobody cares. It's single colourless energy, i.e. it can go in any deck whatsoever. Search your deck for 1 basic Pokemon and put it on your bench. If your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon V, search for up to 5 basic Pokemon instead. Yeah, this is cool for family, taken as far as it's possible to take it. Now, one thing that is very, very, very important to note here, this is out of your control to a point. Now, a lot of decks are really relying on Pokemon V, and you'll just be able to use this. But then you've got decks like Giratina. Well, Giratina isn't going to leave Giratina in the active, especially if they know you're playing this. They are going to be playing Comfy. And they are going to be trying to leave Comfy in the active so that you can't use this. And then it comes down to, well, maybe you can use Escape Rope. Maybe they will only have Pokemon V on their bench, so dropping an Escape Rope will force them to put a Pokemon V active. And you know what? That's kind of annoying, but it'll be fine. Or maybe Boss's Orders. And look, you don't want to use Boss's Orders, but actually getting all of your basic Pokemon out, yeah. And in that situation, it is both your attack for the turn and it is your supporter for the turn. So it is asking quite a lot. But again, it is getting all of your basics out. It is making sure that you've got access to everything you need. So Sigilif basically gets better and worse depending on what your opponent does. If they leave a Pokemon V in the active, it's phenomenal. If they leave only Pokemon V on their bench, it's really very good. And if you've got a boss's orders to use it, it's a bit meh. And the problem is, this has kind of got to be a turn 1. This isn't going to be a turn 3 or 4 thing. You either use it like turn 1 or you don't use it. So, look, I like this card. I like it a lot. But if you're playing this, you have to bear in mind that you're only going to be playing one of these. So you've got to get it into the active, probably turn 1 or 2, depending on whether you go first or second. And you've got to be able to try and make sure your opponent's got a Pokemon V in the active. That is not ideal. Also, please bear in mind, you cannot attack turn 1 going first. So your opponent will have a turn to try and make sure they don't have a Pokemon V in the active before you can use Sigilif. That is a big problem. I give it between 3 and 4 Wassies. When I give half Wassies, that would be barbaric. I think it's a really good card. But I think it is one your opponent can play around if they know it's coming. Hey, speaking of which, the new Raichu. Now again, we've got free energy, 120, nobody cares, that's terrible. But what we've got here is single colourless energy, 40 damage. That ain't good. If your opponent has used their V-Star power this game, this attack deals 100 more damage. And look, the damage here is in no way, shape or form a coincidence, right? This is extremely deliberate. What happens if you hit for weakness and double 140? Oh, look. You just so happen to end up at 280. Oh, look. That's exactly the amount of HP that we see on Palkia. The Sweet to Lightning is seeing a huge amount of play right now. Gee whiz. What a coincidence. Except it's obviously not a coincidence, yeah. The card designers here seem to have very obviously printed this as a counter to Palkia. And you know what? It is perfect. It is amazing when they use their V-Star power. Because look, I can flood the board with Pikachu, and sure, they'll get 1 or 2 KOs, but then what's going to happen is they are going to use their V-Star power, and then I'm just going to be KOing them super easily for the rest of the game. It's phenomenal. So they're just not going to use their V-Star power. And sure, I know that not using the V-Star power makes it way more difficult to use something like a Radiant Greninja, so they might have to hold off on using that. But Palkia is a 2-energy Pokemon. It's really not that difficult to get the energy on. And the kind of decks that are playing Raichu are going to be the kind of decks that take a turn or 2 to evolve up, i.e. they are the kind of decks where you really can afford to have a slightly slower start and then just start wrecking. So what's going to happen is, yeah, sure, maybe you can catch them by surprise game 1. Maybe. It's not going to work for the rest of the games. Game 2 and 3, it ain't going to work. Bearing in mind they're going to be playing Melanie as well. These decks will be playing Melanie. So the V-Star power's great, accelerating free energy, but you don't have to do it. You can hold off. And that is exactly what's going to happen when you play Raichu. I adore this in Zoroark decks, because essentially, with Zoroark decks, you can switch it for any Stage 1 Pokemon, and this is a single colourless energy. So look, Zoroark decks have been lacking a Palkia counter. This is a phenomenal Palkia counter that won't work. Because the second they see Raichu hit the discard pile, they will just not use their V-Star power. And if you can wait until they use their V-Star power before you put Raichu in the discard pile, because Zoroark swaps with the discard pile, sure, game 1 will be great. But in game 2, they are not going to use their V-Star power. Oh, also worth bearing in mind, they also play Kyurem nowadays, that is more energy acceleration. So I assure you, you might get this as a surprise in game 1. And incidentally, this makes Raichu in Zoroark a way better option if you are playing single game. In best of 1 formats, it's way better. In best of 3, you might get it as a surprise game 1. It's not going to work games 2 and 3. I'm giving this 3 Wassies. because I adore this, and I have been desperate for a card like this, because I've been playing a lot of Zoroark, although Sableye's been scaring me off lately. I've been playing a lot of Zoroark. I have been desperate for a good Palkia counter, and you know what? This isn't it. Because your opponent can play around it. The only games you are going to win a best of 3 against a Palkia player with Raichu are games against bad players who still insist on using their V-Star power. It's not the same. Also, they will use their V-Star power at the end of the game to take their final prizes when it's too late to do anything. But hey, that V-Star power goes nicely onto Radiant Greninja, and if you're annoyed with Radiant Pokemon, might I introduce you to Noivern? I like Noivern. And actually, again, this is a phenomenal card in Zoroark decks. I love this Noivern. This Noivern is amazing. Now, free retreat is really nice. No weakness is really nice. This is all brilliant. 2 energy, 70 damage, draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. That's actually a really good attack. You'll be KOing Evolving Basics and Comfy, and draw until you've got 7 cards in your hand. Great attack. But it's a weird, awkward attack cost of Psychic and Darkness. Sorry. But 2 colorless energy, Radiant Hunt. Choose one of your opponent's Radiant Pokemon in play. That Pokemon is now knocked out. Love it. There's so many good things about this attack. Firstly, it's an instant KO on a Radiant Pokemon. Yay! Secondly, it doesn't matter where they are. It can hit the bench. Thirdly, Manaphy won't protect them on the bench because it doesn't do damage, it gets an instant KO, so Manaphy ain't going to protect you. And thirdly, this works brilliantly with double turbo energy, because the general downside of double turbo energy is that the damage you do is reduced by 20. Who cares? You're not doing damage. You're getting an instant KO. Again, this is an occasional thing, and it works way better in Zoroark decks, where you can switch between stage 1s at will. But this is really nice. I actually love the second attack if you're playing a deck which can take advantage of it. But I love this first attack. And if you can fit this into a deck, you should. I'm giving it 4 Wassies. I really like this. Come at me in the comment section. And here's the thing. All the cards I've talked about in this video have problems. None of them are perfect. But all of these have so much potential, and I am loving them. But I want to hear from you guys. I want to know which of these cards you think look good. I want to know which of these you're excited about. I want to know anything you want to tell me. So let me know in the comment section, would you? Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWasi. That's where we talk Pokemon card games, all kinds of fun things. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel. You can join a Discord and chat with us. You can get weekly bonus podcasts where I answer all of your questions, and you can get shout-outs on the channel, on these videos, like the lovely Jez Herford, who's been a supporter of ours for a little while, and is a very lovely person. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.